Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with Charles Coulombe.
And I'm here too, and I want you to know that last week when we did our show, I was very happy. I didn't mention this then, but the night before we'd had torrential rains here in LA, and I was able to have a fire on the fireplace for the first time in years.
Wow.
It was so cozy. It was great. Anyway, those of you who live in colder climes, I realize it's a pain shoveling snow and all that. I get it, really. But just remember when you're sitting next to the fire, all toasty and warm, normally we can't do that here in SoCal. Just so you know.
Okay. Jay Lance sent in 3 questions.
All right.
First question. I love the Catholic faith and I admire Japanese culture, and it breaks my heart that the Japanese never converted. When I read of the history of the attempted conversion of Japan, I come across 2 very different versions of it. One which generally brushes aside the attempt as having been unimportant with little to no impact on society. The other versions hold that the faith did indeed make important inroads, and that, barring a few tragic events that set up its downfall, the faith had a real shot at becoming a major staple of Japanese life. Which version of history is actually closer to reality?
The second. In point of fact, the missionaries had a huge continuing effect on pagan Japanese culture. The most obvious is tempura. You know what tempura is? It's the shrimp and vegetables with the batter that are fried.
Yeah.
Well, that was introduced by the Portuguese missionaries. And tempura is their manner of pronouncing templum, the Latin for temple, for church, which is what was used there. It was called tempura cooking because that was introduced by the people that ran the templum, the tempura.
Wow.
They can't pronounce L, you see.
Yeah.
Chinese the other way, they can't pronounce R. So, that's the question. The very fact that the Kakure Kirishitan, the hidden Christians, were able to survive for centuries of persecution, tells us that had the faith been encouraged rather than persecuted, it no doubt would have transformed Japan. And that is an enormous tragedy that it didn't happen that way.
So, I mean, were there a few tragic events that set up the? I mean, so the faith did make important inroads.
It did. Unfortunately, the shogun came to believe that the faith was simply a pretext for Spain and/or Portugal seizing control of Japan.
Okay.
This was a belief encouraged, oddly enough, by English and Dutch traders, being good Protestants, of course, and married to the truth, the way Protestants tend to be.
Wow. Okay. Second question. What elements of Japanese culture do you think were the most consonant with the Catholic faith? And what elements do you think were the most caustic to the faith, or at least caused the most hurdles for her to overcome?
The idea of honor, that was very much a part of Japanese culture, was certainly very congruent with Catholicism, at least as it was then. We modern Catholics don't know a lot about honor, but, it was a big thing back then. The concept of sacrifice, both divine sacrifice all the way down to personal sacrifice, is a big part of Japanese culture. And that they got. But they had troubles with, Shinto tends to divinize everything. There are spirits, kami, all over the place. And they're given divine worship. In the European mode, there would have been fairies and angels. But the idea of a single monotheistic God was very tough for the Japanese. And also the sexual mores were extremely hard. The Japanese in those days, they practiced polygamy. They had the whole geisha subculture and all this sort of thing. But again, it's not that far removed from the Roman experience. So, that's important to bear in mind. When you have certain writers like Shusaku Endo and folks like that say that, the problem is that Catholicism is so completely foreign to the Japanese experience, it could never catch on. Well, it was completely foreign to the Roman experience. It's just that there was no Constantine in Japan.
That's true.
So, I think that.
Oh. Okay, his third question. I've seen more than a few books on knights which have sections in them talking about what they call the Eastern Knight, the samurai. What did the Christian knight and the Shinto Buddhist samurai have in common, and in what ways did they differ?
Well, the honor code was similar. But where they differed was their attitude toward weakness.
Oh.
The Western knight was to characterize himself, I mean, again, ideally, obviously, was to characterize himself as the protector of the weak against the strong. Whereas the samurai was taught to have contempt for the weak. That's why he could use a peasant, for practice with his sword.
Wow.
And again, because of their religion, the belief in karma, that peasant who got chopped to ribbons just being randomly used as a target would undoubtedly, having served such a noble end, would undoubtedly be incarnated in a higher position afterwards. So you see, it's a completely different viewpoint.
Yeah.
So I would say that the similarities have primarily to do with honor, and the differences to do with their attitude toward the weak.
I see. Okay. Daniel asks, how did the Netherlands go from being a completely Protestant country to mainly an agnostic country? 22% of the population is Protestant, 28% is Catholic, 42% of the population has no religion.
Well, that's a very good question. The answer is that the Netherlands were a Protestant country, they're now a post-Protestant country. Prior to Vatican II, Dutch society was very, what's the word I want, stratified. There's a specific word for it in Dutch that the senior moment is preventing me from getting. But basically almost everything was divided into three: Catholic, Protestant, and what was called liberal, or agnostic, whatever, but it's called liberal. And this division went into every aspect of life: athletics, farming. They lived in three different worlds. That began to break down as a result of World War II. But the Dutch Catholics were very much like the Irish Catholics in the sense that they didn't have a great deal of lay leadership, very clerical. And when the Dutch clergy went bad, and they went bad, during and in the wake of the council, it just collapsed. Part of it, too, was that religiosity of any kind became identified with this division in Dutch society, which was, especially in the wake of World War II with the German invasion and all that, seemed to have been a terrible thing. And again, their clergy really went terrible. And it's extreme, because today in the Netherlands, you'll find some extraordinarily good clerics, and you'll find some really horrible ones. The middle ground that we tend to have doesn't seem to be there. But they are, as far as the Catholics went, a textbook example of Chaucer's Parson, when he says, if gold should rust, what can poor iron do? However, there's more to it, because it also has to do with the decay of Protestantism and the decay of Calvinism, because the Dutch Reformed were Calvinists. And the Dutch Reformed Church is a fascinating institution. Why? Because it is so varied. In the Netherlands, it started out as very strict, and now they're the people who bring you gay marriage. But in New York, because it was the colonial church, it is, alongside the Episcopalians, very much a society church now. In South Africa, they're the people who brought you apartheid. Also in New York, they brought you Norman Vincent Peale and the Prosperity Gospel. Because again, this is related to Calvinism, God will reward the elect. They also brought you out here the Crystal Cathedral. Yeah.
Okay.
But in Michigan, the Dutch Reformed are so very strict, and they don't drink and that kind of stuff. At least they're not supposed to. So, at any rate, when Calvinism decays, its adherents tend to become nothing in particular. And you can see this with Unitarianism coming out of New England Puritanism. Same thing happened in the Netherlands. So you bring together these four things: the confessional division of society and its discrediting, the doctrinal implosion in Dutch Protestantism, and the whole Vatican II, post-Vatican II, and Dutch Catholicism, and then you put it all into one country. So, I mean, they had a pretty tough road to hoe. Interestingly enough, the Dutch monarchy is the only institution that has sailed through all of this, more or less undamaged.
Okay.
It's very strange, but I mean, a lot of Dutch are complete agnostics, but loyal to their queen, or now king.
What religion is the king?
Nominally Dutch Reformed.
Okay.
Because that was the state church once upon a time.
Okay. Rosie has two questions for you. The first question is, what is distributism? This is a concept that a lot of erudite Catholics seem to espouse. G.K. Chesterton and Joseph Pearce, to name a few.
It's the belief you should distribute stuff. No. I'm sorry, I couldn't help that one. No, but it is the belief that the means of production, i.e. land and industry and all that, should be as widely distributed as possible. In other words, as opposed to major monopolies and different businesses and huge land holdings, you should have a lot of small farmers, small artisans, small this and that.
And these should be actually owned, not in a communist state.
No. Okay. Owned outright by whomever owns it.
Yeah.
And that basically, we should all live close to the means of our making a living. It would mean, for instance, that as a writer, I'd own my own computer. Oh. Okay. Well, anyway. But no, and that as many people as possible should do a bit of farming or gardening, if nothing else.
Interesting. Okay, so distributists are very much against giant companies.
Yeah. They're against giant monopolies. They're against huge business, government business combines.
Oh yeah.
All that sort of thing. Very much against it. It's in keeping with Catholic social teaching, certainly to a huge extent. What has always been the problem in distributism is granting would be a wonderful thing to have. How do we get from here to there?
Yeah.
Because the problem is that a government that was strong enough to do this would be very unlikely to want to give up its strength. Because it'd also be for solidarity, not solidarity, subsidiarity.
Yeah.
They're very strongly for subsidiarity. Small is beautiful. The most done at the lowest level, all that kind of thing. To get from a government that was capable of breaking up the monster businesses to a government that was simply that.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's been the problem that distributists have wrestled with for many years.
What is there an ethical reason, I mean, for believing that, it should be, the means of production should be on a very wide level? I mean, what?
Well, sure, because the making of one's own living by one's own hand is a very moral, not to say a very medieval thing. And this, by the way, this does not contradict what I said in our last episode about class structure.
Oh, yeah.
Because the distributists would look to the Middle Ages and say, well, there you had a very definite class structure, but you didn't have the concentration of power that we have. Because with the wide distribution of economic force is also the wide distribution of political force. So, if you have, there's a difference between a plot of land that's made up of a bunch of little farms run by independent farmers, and say the lord of the manor, who happens to have the area where everybody wants to graze, and the mill where they want to grind their corn and that kind of stuff. There's a huge difference between that and a plantation.
Yeah.
There's a totally different dynamic. There's a Lord of the Manor, as it were, in both places, but oh, how different.
Yeah, I see. Okay, the final question today, Rosie asks, would it be fair to compare the Arian crisis to the crisis in faith we have today?
Yeah. Oh, you want more than that? Gosh, you're demanding. All right. No, I mean, sure, it's universal. Today we have a crisis of faith that extends to the very highest echelons of the church. I think that probably, I don't know for sure, of course, because usually these things tend to get remembered in the best light possible. But I think there's a good possibility that the whole, both the Knights of Malta affair and the dubia of the four cardinals will go down in history as an example to future popes. So don't let this happen to you. No, I would not be surprised. I can't say. I mean, if Paul VI is lucky, all he'll be remembered for is Humanae Vitae. If Francis is lucky, all he'll be remembered for is canonizing Emperor Seraph. But if he's remembered for the Order of Malta and the dubia, his memory will be something future popes will not want to think about.
Okay, let's make things a little bit more concrete. So the Arian heresy was sort of a denial of the divinity of Christ.
Right. And at one point, all but 5 of the bishops of the church subscribed to it, and even the Pope signed a semi-Arian creed.
Wow.
Liberius, that was.
Okay, and so the crisis of the church today involves what beliefs? What beliefs are in trouble?
Everything.
Everything.
Everything. The crisis of belief today goes from, well, I mean, as Benedict XVI said last May, we no longer believe in the necessity of the church and the sacraments for salvation. So that removes both the need to evangelize and the need even to be Catholic. It is the complete rejection, really, of everything Christ said about the church. It is the rejection of Christ's admonition to the apostles. Go thou and make disciples of all nations. Because if the church is not necessary, none of her doctrines matter.
That begs the question to me, what I would ask these people is, why did Christ even bother?
Well, yeah. And the answer is he was a nice person. He came to give us a good example. He came to give us a way of giving the clergy an income. Very important. Christ died so that the clerics could have dough.
Wow.
Well, what else am I supposed to think? I mean, if he didn't come to establish the means for saving our souls through incorporation into him. But you see, the problem with that is that they won't take the final step. If we don't need the church, we don't need the clergy. Get a job. That's the step they won't take. Well, some of them have, but usually not for theological reasons, generally to get married. I tell you, it is comparable. Because the Arian heresy was the rejection of the divinity of Christ. And if that goes, it all goes. I mean, they weren't rejecting transubstantiation, which, of course, they didn't use the word then, but they knew about the real presence and all that. But what does that mean if Christ is a God? It means you're turning the bread and wine into the body and flesh of a man. Now, that's a nice trick if you can pull it off. I'm not saying it isn't exciting. But so what? And you see, what these people do not understand, because they're so lost in the mazes of their own minds, is that if what they say is true, we don't need them. If what they are saying is true, there's only one answer to them. 2 words. Go away. Because what are you bothering me for? What's this for? Why are you talking? You've got nothing to say that anyone needs to hear. Go bye-bye. Retire. Die if you want. Because it's all meaningless. It's all drivel. But obviously they can't let themselves realize that. And therein lies the rub. If I espoused a position which, logically speaking, meant that I was a useless parasite who'd be better off dead, I promise you I would never follow it out logically. Never in a million years. And you might say, wait a minute, Charles, if what you're saying is true, and if I were in a position of authority over you, I'd smack you down way before you ever got the chance to point that out to me. Trust me, you would be toast. So that's kind of the problem with it. You know, and again, if any holder of the new theology or the new liberalism or whatever you want to call it should hear this, understand, Father, your Lordship, your Excellency, your Grace, whatever you are, you still have time. As long as you're breathing, you still have time. Because Christ, in fact, did die. The sacraments are confected so that we can save our souls. We can escape the trap of being human that the fall of our first parents put us in. And that is the reality, you see, of human life. The problem with these guys is that they've declared war on reality. But reality always wins. You can smack around its adherents as much as you like. Then I can tell you the world is round, the sky is blue, or whatever, and you can smack me around for it. You can cut off my head for it. But you know what? It's still going to be round and blue. There is nothing you can do if you make that declaration of war that will let you win. All you can do is destroy people. And that will come back to you in various ways. At the end of the day, of course, snap, crackle, pop. So, I mean, I look at these guys, I look at the Arians and everything in between. The communists. This is something, ladies and gentlemen, if you're feeling very down in the dumps about affairs in church and state today. When I was young, and I love to harken back to those days because for me they were very pleasant, but the shadow of communism hung over our heads, and communism seemed unbeatable. And where is it now? So, only held by a few members of the ruling class. But anyway, did you need that? Did you really have to go there? Honestly? Anyway, and a few Jesuits. But you had to say that. Anyway, the point I'm making is, yeah, it's comparable to the Arian heresy. And if we have world enough in time, and these aren't the last days, one day it will be remembered as well as the Arian heresy.
Wow.
And on that joyful note, and I do think it's joyful, the truth will always out, ladies and gentlemen. You know, to steal from Lord of the Rings, I always remember Gandalf chatting with Frodo about the political situation in Middle-earth. And he goes into great detail about the terrible things that are happening. And Frodo says, "Oh, I wish I hadn't been born in such times," which I'm sure we all can relate to on one level or another. And Gandalf's response was, "So say you, so say I, so say everyone born in such times. But it's not given to us to decide what time we'll be born in, only what we shall do with the time we are given." And that is the thing, ladies and gentlemen. It is given to us to decide what we're going to do with the time that we have. And that is a tremendous gift. And it's something that no prelate and no bureaucrat and no president can take away from us. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know, that was almost a downer.
I like the ending. That was very upbeat.
All right, well, let's stay upbeat, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, if you can at least light a fire in your fireplace and get cozy, you can forget about all this stuff for an evening.
See you next time.
Take care.